Okay, welcome everybody. This is the Stageable State of the Stage podcast. My name is Benjamin Reed, and I am the founder and CEO of Stageable, stageable.com. And I am joined today by a very special guest, Mr. David Rainey. David, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. David, you and we performed together years and years ago at the Houston Shakespeare Festival, Hamlet and Hamlet's father. So you and I are familiar with one another, although not so much in recent years. Will you catch us up on what you've been doing the last couple of years?
Yeah, so since we did that show, that was quite a while ago.
Really was.
Certainly been I've been at the Alley Theater. I've been a resident company there, members there since 2000 actually.
Okay.
So it's been 24 years, and I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of happening here. Um, so anyway, been doing shows over there for the most part. I had a theater company called the Landing Theater Company, which I started that in 2010 and ran that here in Houston for about 11 years. We primarily were doing new works and had a really successful new works playwriting festival. It was called New American Voices Playwriting Festival. And then after the pandemic happened and we were coming out of that, it sort of became clear that I really couldn't do both those things because right before the pandemic, um, the Alley decided that they were going to make all the resident company full-time staff members. So we finally had like salaries all year,
Mm.
but also our responsibilities were changing. And so as we were coming out of the pandemic and about to go back into to the theaters and rehearsals and shows and all that, I realized that I couldn't keep up with everybody if I had a theater company on my back. And so it was the right time for us to kind of put it to bed and stuff. So we dropped that and kept working with the Alley, and I've been teaching for almost 20 years here in Houston, doing a lot of coaching and classes and things. And so after things got going again after the pandemic, I was looking around for a place to work. And I eventually decided to go ahead and get a studio of my own. So I created Studio for Actors Houston, which actually just got incorporated. I've been operating it for a while, just with me and my classes, but I've sort of expanded it out to include other teachers. And so I've just gone around and been looking, bringing in really high end people. A lot of the professors from the University of Houston, their theater program, are teaching for us, um, and just various people in the industry. So it's trying to be a very, very eclectic place that is providing training and resources to the arts community that that's not only what they need right now, but also things that they don't get offered very much. You can't find the mass class most of the time unless you're in a drama program. On a lot of the voice work that gets done and is done as part of a training program. So we're trying to bring those things to the rest of the population, and the instructors who teach that, those high end teachers, are really excited about stepping out of the university. They really want to share what they know with the rest of the community. So I'm excited about what we're trying to build here. I think it's going to be a really great resource for the community, and that's what it's just designed to be. And we also have a great newsletter that is trying to include everything. There's not any place, there hasn't been any place in Houston where you can kind of get all the information, like, where are all the shows?
Mm.
Whoever has the most money to put ads is the ones that get seen. And I can't tell you how many people, audience members come around and say, I didn't even know there were these theaters in town, and like they've been around for a long time and they do really, really good work. But they just don't know about them. They haven't seen them. So we have a newsletter that puts out every month everything that's going on in town, all the resources, not only our classes, but anybody else who's teaching. We put all their stuff in there, so it's kind of a one-stop place for people to go in. And so if you're looking for acting stuff, you know where to go. If you're looking for, a headshot or looking for whatever, that we have lists of things that people can find. So they have a one-stop shop to help them with resources. So I'm excited about what we're trying to do there, trying to build something for this community. So that's kind
That's
of the
super
path.
exciting.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what I've been
Well,
doing.
and that's something I think your observation is right on the money, and it's something that I noticed too, in that the having that sort of central connecting point between the people who might be interested in these things and the people doing these things, they often miss one another,
Yeah,
you know? And like you said, people don't even know these things are occurring. Um,
yeah.
and that's a
And it's
problem, I think.
yeah, and it's getting harder and harder to even get the message out about anything anymore. I mean, I keep running across
Mhm.
people who just have not seen the stuff we've been putting out stuff all the time on social media, and they just never see it. So it's kind of hit and miss these days. I mean, it used to be you could put an ad in a paper and people would see it, but everything's so fractured now. There are people who are only on Instagram, who only do TikTok, who only do Facebook,
Yeah.
who just don't see these other messages, and then the algorithms for those platforms also pick and choose who gets to see what. And so you could be putting a lot of stuff out there and miss a whole lot of people just because there's no way for them to actually see it, you know. So it's challenging.
It's so true. It's very challenging. And even if even if you get through all of those challenges that you just mentioned, there's also just we're inundated with so much noise that even then it's just a a percentage, a small percentage of what we're even, scrolling past.
Right.
So it's yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, it's difficult. I imagine you guys are having the same kind of deal with, putting stuff out there and saying, "Hey, audiences," you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of my goals with Stageable is for it to be like a digital home base where we can connect stages and audiences, and the audiences can help to enable the stages that they love to continue to do the work, so that it's there for this generation and for generations to come. Um, well, speaking of cutting through the noise, though, you are currently, you just opened a show this weekend. You're the title character in Death of a Salesman at Rec Room Arts. Is that right? Rec Room Arts?
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, we just opened on Saturday, and it's been it's been quite a ride. It's a tremendous role to play, and I never really even thought about playing it until actually a couple of years ago. Richard Nelson had come to the alley to do a production of Little Comedies, which was a bunch of short Chekhov plays that was
Mhm.
kind of put together in a performance. And he was an amazing director. That whole experience was just really great because he like held us accountable to just staying true. He would get very upset with us if we started trying to play comedy, trying to make things fun. He's like, if they're
Mhm.
laughing, they're gonna laugh because it's true. Don't do that other stuff. And it was quite a lesson for all of us. I mean, we hadn't been put in a position of really kind of being a student again in a long time, and I think that year that was probably everybody's sort of favorite experience on the stage, But while we were working on it, Richard came to me and he said, "Have you ever done Willie Loman?" And I said, "Well, no." And he's like, you really ought to play that role and stuff, I said, "Well, you gonna come back and teach and direct it?" He's like, "Well, we'll see." But anyway, so I had a big gap from Christmas Carol until the next show. I'm going to be in primary trust at the alley. So it was a break from the end of December until the 1st of April. So it was a huge hole. And so when the rec room, I had found out that I was available and stuff, they were like, "Hey, you want to do a show for us?" And I was like, "Okay, well, like what?" And like, "Well, let's think about it and stuff." So that they thought about it. And a couple weeks later, Matt, who's the artistic director, Matt Hune, he called me and said, "Hey, what do you think about Death of a Salesman?" And I was like, "That sounds great," So it took a little while for them to secure the rights and to do all that stuff, But we eventually got it together, and they put together an amazing cast. It's a very good show. So very pleased with it.
Yeah, you're working with my good friend Brandon Carter.
Yeah, yeah, he's playing my son in this, and he's
Yes,
doing a
he
fantastic
is.
job. Yeah, yeah, he's like, I think he's the best thing in the show. He's really, really good, really good.
Oh man, I believe it. Although I would love to see you, and you're working with Mr. Jack Young on this too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
lots of connections there. And I thought that they did a really stunning job with the photography work and the putting out a lot of media out into the world that I thought looked just, it made me want to see the show, you know. Talk about bridging the gap and tell me about who kind of headed up that effort.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, Tasha Gurel is a photographer. She's been doing she was, an actor here in town, but really started getting into photography, and she's been doing a lot of headshot work for a lot of the actors here in town and what have you. So she did an amazing job, both conceptually on it, with her working with Matt on sort of how they wanted to present this and what these photographs should look like, and then certainly the execution of them has uh, been really great. So I know the concept wise, they wanted these sort of very dark kind of stills that were more shadow than light,
Hmm.
and then certainly the production photos were taken live, and that's a kind of an accurate look at what the show actually looks like on. And I'm
Yeah.
sure they probably filtered it a little bit and stuff, but yeah.
And it's a
So
small
she did
venue,
a great
right?
job. Sorry.
It's a smaller venue, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's a tiny, tiny little theater. I have to say, I mean, they do amazing work over there, but boy, that place is primitive to work in.
Hmm.
It's very, very small. There's one bathroom for everybody, for the audience and for the actors, and what have you. So it's very, very, very small. It's kind of like, if you know the Theater Row theaters, at least when I was living in New York, were just sort of gutted buildings. Like they took the first two or three floors and just gutted them, and then they just
Hmm.
put rows of seats, and then they spilled onto a, a stage that was the length of the as wide as a room, and that's kind of
Right.
what it's like, but much even smaller, a lot smaller. So it's just a little tiny, tiny little stamp of a space, and about 60. They did cram in another row of seats, so it's almost 70 seats. So it's very, very small.
That's quite the adjustment to make from going from the alley to that kind
Yeah.
of performance space.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I kept saying to myself, I said, well, David, maybe you're just spoiled, because I ran a small theater company, and we worked in a lot of
Hmm.
tight spaces as well, and what have you and stuff. Somehow this feels a little tighter, but yeah, it's quite a bit different. Mostly just in terms of just having manpower and stuff, but it's a little different than working on there. But I do have to say, like in terms of the production itself, the fact that it is so limited. The fact that there really is only room for just basically a stand, like a platform as for a stage. Um, they have a back wall on it and what have you. But because of that, it actually I think feeds the play a lot
Hmm.
better than those productions that where they have time to actually create a kitchen and create a bedroom and create these other spaces, because the play is so much about really sort of slipping in and out of reality, where he's talking to somebody, but then also hearing or having a conversation with somebody else who's not there and all that. The fact that everything has to happen on this little stand, and there isn't any real thing that you're sort of having to say, oh, this is a kitchen.
Hmm.
It kind of allows that thing to happen much more, I think, easily and more accessibly. I've had several people come and say, "Hey, I've read this play, I've seen a couple of productions, I've seen the movies, and this is the first time I actually understood what was
Hmm.
really going on with the play." And I think that has a lot to do with the sort of amorphous nature of what we're kind of working with. It's just too small for us to do anything other than sort of invented all on one space. And I think it plays in our favor. And I think that's one of the issues that a lot of like big productions have, because I think that they get kind of stuck too deep in reality, which doesn't allow them to morph out of it very easily, or not as easily, I would say. Um, so I think that that's one of the wins for this production, and why I think it's effective is because it's such a small, tiny space that we're working on. So I think it's pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, I wish I could make it down to Houston so I could be there in person and see it.
yeah. Wish you could too.
Yeah. Um, so I want to talk to you a little bit about your experience with doing live stream theater because you just recently did Christmas Carol live stream.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah. When we were doing in the pandemic, the Alley did a whole season of shows. I think there was maybe 13 plays that got produced online.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so it was interesting, and it was challenging in a way that you kind of didn't expect it to be, because they would ship you cameras and tripods and some not very much lighting equipment or what have you, but um, and then they'd ship you all your costumes and what have you, and so you had to kind of get yourself like made up in your house. And the biggest stress for me was just that I know this is my office. All right. This is the studio. So this is sort of the
Hmm.
back office of that. I mean, so at the time I didn't have, like if I'd had this, I'd have been fine. I mean, there's plenty of room and it looks nice, all that stuff. Uh, I just didn't have a house that I felt like showing off to people. You know what I mean? And I didn't have enough space,
Hmm.
enough room in it to really, really maneuver. So it was that part of it was really stressful and very, very challenging, what have you. But it was interesting to kind of work on shows in that way, because we had to. Um, it kind of forces you to kind of approach the work from a little slightly different angle, because you're just working with this, and that's all you got.
Yeah.
And so the acting has to kind of be all about all this stuff, and the sort of the physical and physicality of it all. Um, uh, had to kind of go away. The same thing, you have a Zoom meeting and stuff, everybody's just a bunch of heads,
Right.
so for acting, it's a bit of a bit more of a challenge and stuff. I've done some coaching online where people have been long distance, and I've coached them and stuff, and typically we work a lot like this close, where we're just working on the text and the meaning and all that stuff. But eventually I have them get up, and I get some distance so I can get to see sort of what they are completely doing with their body. And so this kind of communication online can work pretty easily for an acting situation if you are kind of doing all of that. But
Yeah.
when the whole production is mostly just this, then it's not really film, and it's not really theater. You know, it's just I guess it's just
Yeah.
like storytelling. You know what I mean? It's kind of like readers theater. I guess is how probably the best
Yeah.
example for it. Readers theater, where everybody kind of puts their acting forward in front, and so you're all side by side putting out your acting that way, which can be very, very effective on stage. Much more than I think a lot of people realize. Um, so I guess it was kind of like that in a lot of respects. So, but it was
I
interesting
I
and
thought it was
challenging.
so, thought it was so cool how the alley. Most people didn't go to the lengths that the alley did,
Mhm.
um, as far as sending cameras and costuming, and felt like y'all really put a lot more thought behind how can we continue to be theatrical, even given the limitations of the medium. Um, can you talk about the rehearsals and how you went about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was basically Zoom rehearsals. And I really don't. think it was anything more that we did than simply that. I mean, sort of we talked through production elements and all that stuff, but as far as like the sort of rehearsing and the interactions that we had with each other, we rehearsed it like you would any other kind of thing, but it was sort of Zoom conversations or FaceTime,
Hmm.
telephone
Hmm.
conversations kind of thing. Um, and you just kind of worked on your pieces and got your lines together, and then try to get the flow and talk through. It gave us a lot more opportunity to do more like table work kind of uh, conversations and what have you. We can rehearse the piece and then sit down and talk about it, discuss it. So and we also started a lot earlier on things, and um, so I do think that we just had a little more time to put things together. It was a little daunting when we got to taping it because it was you're suddenly on camera having to tape stuff, and me for one, I know other people might have more experience working in film and television, where you've got to walk in and just know it and deliver it and stuff, But I was having I was freaking out a little more than most people, I guess, just because it was kind of new to me, trying to
Yeah.
kind of deliver that. Um, but yeah, I mean, as far as the rehearsal process, I don't think that it was that much different than you would in any other kind of show. It's just that you weren't able to kind of maneuver around as much as you would on a stage. Um,
Hmm.
but the process of working it out was kind of what you'd expect it to be. I mean, there's still some productions that are still being done online. There's a person here in Houston created Zoom Shakespeare, and that's still going on. And they do
Oh,
Shakespeare
cool.
plays. Um, I think they pretty much do Shakespeare play at least once a month, if not more than that. And they just bring in actors from town and say, "Hey, let's do a Shakespeare play." And I'm not sure how long they rehearse it, but not as long as we had for sure. Um,
Yeah.
and then they do the production. And I haven't actually seen any of the product that they put out, so I'm not sure like if there's some costuming or any kind of technical thing and what have you. But I know with the landing, we did a lot of online productions, so readings during the pandemic as well. We had our New American Voices Playwriting Festival, and so when things shut down, we decided to go digital on it. And so what we did, we sent everybody um, backdrops so that they kind of had sort of matching backdrops and even some lighting equipment if people didn't have decent lighting equipment. We sent, but I don't know, decent, I mean like clip lights, but we would send
Yeah.
them stuff so that they could, light themselves well and what have you. And we did we had 4 plays every year, so we did all of those plays online, and you know, I, I think, overall, I mean, some of them were better than others in terms of execution, but, I think definitely at least half of them were really quite nice. Um, so, um, so I have a lot of experience doing that as well.
Hmm.
And that was the thing that I kind of said, you know, we were having, when the pandemic started, the alley was doing a lot of just do anything in order to keep the audience engaged. So there'd be people going out in their garden and saying, "Oh, this is my garden," and and they're doing little funny little clippy things that were kind of nothing. They're just trying to be entertaining and trying to, make people smile and all that. And I finally said to the powers that be, like I said, if we are the only company in the country where we're getting paid to be actors, and if this thing goes on for 3 months, 6 months, a year. And the only thing that we can say is that we, put out a bunch of nothing, then that's kind
Right.
of the pinnacle of, of waste and elitism.
Mm.
I'm like, we've got to do something more than just, nonsense.
Mm.
And that was kind of when the idea started clicking about, well, yeah, so we could do something. And, and Rob had a bunch of plays that he had adapted from other languages and stuff that he was excited about getting to do. And a lot of them were shorter pieces. And he was like, well, this is kind of be a perfect opportunity for that. And so we came up with the idea of doing a Christmas Carol, and then this whole season of shows kind of evolved and came out of that and stuff, and I don't know whether the idea would have come anyway, but I'm glad I spoke up because I do think it kind of put the fire under people because they really weren't thinking about it beyond just how can we keep audiences engaged,
Yeah.
and as it turns out, I mean that effort to put out product, I mean, really made the alley a lot of money. Because once the corporations and audiences started seeing that, hey, you guys are doing something and you're putting this stuff out for free, and you're working, they started throwing money at the theater. A lot of corporations that
Oh,
had been giving gave again, even though we didn't have a season, we were, just doing it digital. And a lot of new companies came in and said, well, here's money because we see that you're doing something. So it was a huge financial boost for the theater that they took action and actually started trying to create product instead of just sort of spinning their wheels. So feel good about what we did and that we, you know, finally came around to the idea that we could do something that people need or want, what I mean? So it was
I
great.
saw a few things during that time, and I always use the alley as an example of people who did more than just Zoom readings. You know,
Mm,
people who tried to push the boundaries and tried to do it well and tried, like you said, make the product. Um, and more than just, everybody open up your laptops and here's a script, let's read it. It felt a lot more put together, from the alley. And David, was Christmas Carol that you just did, that had a live stream component, or
Oh, I see what you're
did I?
saying. Yeah, yeah, it did. Because when during the pandemic, we did the George Baisley version of Christmas Carol, and then we did it as an online, you know, well, product.
Mhm.
This Christmas Carol is an adaptation that Rob Melrose, our artistic director, wrote, and it was produced. I think. Well, this was, I guess, the second year that we did the play. Maybe it's the third year. I'm getting confused about how many times we've done it. But over this last year, so this is a production we're doing on our stage and what have you. And over this last year, we worked out some kind of a deal with a company that is primarily um, doing live performances or tape performances of Broadway shows, Broadway
Mhm.
and shows that are in sort of the New York area and stuff. So we're the first company outside of New York that is getting to live stream a show. It's not the first time. The first time we did that was for Little Comedies that I mentioned before, with the Chekhov pieces. So that was the first time we did live stream of a production through this company. And then they worked out the deal last year that we would do that for Christmas Carol. And
Cool.
so I think it can be a good thing. I mean, the Brits have been doing it for a long time. The National Theatre, you just go online and buy membership and watch all kinds of productions. And why Actors Equity has been so reluctant to follow the lead, I am not real sure of. I know that it's a lot of old rules, but I do think that the world is changing quite a lot, and it doesn't seem like it should be that hard to adjust, and to allow some of those things to occur here. Um, so um, so hopefully this is the beginning of more and more of that kind of thing because I do think that it would be great if I could go online and pay a little membership, which would help the theaters make money and hopefully us artists make money as well.
Yeah.
Be able to watch productions at Steppenwolf or at the Goodman or at La Jolla Playhouse. I mean, that would be tremendous, and it'd be a tremendous resource for us as actors, and theater community people. But it also would be just good for our audiences, to be able to go and explore more of what's out there because there's a lot of people that can't. I mean, that's the one thing that we kind of learned about this online thing is that there are there are a lot of people that want access to theater that just can't get it. I mean, beyond sort of the ticket prices are too much. There are people who are just like disabled or who
Mm.
are physically not able to do that trek to the theater, but who would love to see what we do. And by having these things online now, those people can access. And now, because these things are online, it is affordable for somebody who might not ever think I could. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are like, I don't know if I could feel comfortable at the alley. That's that big
Mm.
theater over there, who would be fine about pulling it up on their television or their phone and finding it and accessing it. So there's lots of advantages to why that's an important thing to do, and they should work out the finances of that so that it's possible, and also in such a way that that we as artists you know um, get compensated somehow, because in a lot of these deals that's not happening as much as it needs to. Um, it's good for the theaters, but you know, so
Yeah.
yeah, but I think it's a great thing, and I think that more of that should happen. And I'm hoping that this new technology that they've got becomes more and more common, and certainly that we do it more and more at the alley, because there's a lot of good stuff going on
Therein lies, one of the things with live streams is that you do have to, none of the cameras and the lighting and the internet, none of it's actually that complicated, but you do have to learn a little bit about all of it and that sort of unique knowledge in order to make it go as smoothly as it possibly can. It takes some training. Um,
Yeah, that's the hardest part about it all, was that when we were doing that online stuff, was that we had to be technicians and as well as actors. So there was no crew there to help us and stuff. So that was complicated and at times very difficult. You know. I do think that the one thing that is happening these days is that a lot of the casting now these days are online. They're self tape.
mhm.
So as actors, we're now having to figure out, like, how do we create studios in our houses, and how do we tape ourselves in a way that looks good. So the sort of the technical aspects of things is we're sort of being forced to kind of deal with that, forced to you know so it does make it a little easier if you did have an online project to say to people, hey, set this up and let's rehearse and shoot it.
Yeah.
People are getting more familiar with that aspect of things. Sort of like librarians having to learn digital. It's like it used to be all about in books, and
Yeah.
now if they don't know social media and they don't know all the digital stuff, then they can't be a librarian. It's just not the way the world works. So
Yeah, things change and we have to be willing to adapt and change with the times. And I do feel like, especially in an industry that is as old as the performing arts and theater in specific, is that we can get a little stuck in the way things were, the way things used to be, and we can resist um, the need to change up the formats and learn some new things and try things in a new way.
right, right.
So let me ask you this, because I feel like you are a bit like me in that you are a performer entrepreneur. How has that journey been for you when you both with starting founding a theater company, and then after having founded and run a successful theater company, having founded a business that started out as just you and now has grown to, you said you just incorporated recently, and now you've got other teachers who are working there. Tell me a little bit about that journey of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I think part of what I learned about myself is that I am, I guess, a little restless in some ways. For a long time with the alley, there wasn't any security, even though I was a company member and had been since 2000. Um, Still, there'd be gaps and holes, and you kind of just were left out there to fend for yourself. It wasn't like, people were like, I thought you were always getting paid, and that wasn't always the case. It wasn't until only like 5 years ago that started to become a reality. But prior to that, we're just like any other actors. The only difference is that we had a company that was looking out to cast us in a certain number of shows, to give
Mm.
us enough weeks for our health insurance. So it was great to have a company that's kind of doing that. And we just but we still had to have um, we still had to get out in the world after when we were outside of a contract, because we would have our work contracts. And when I first started there, they had an off weeks contract, which was a contract for 9 months out of the year, so the regular year, not the summers, that would fill the gaps, but would be a lot less pay, but you still got paid. But then we had this flood that happened, Allison, back in, what was it, 92 or 3, that ended up
Mhm.
shutting that down and stuff. And so after that, then we didn't have that off weeks thing. They would occasionally, if the gap was only a couple of weeks or something like that, they would give you some off weeks pay. But it was a lot longer than that. Then you just kind of were on your own. And the difference between us and the other actor was that most actors, because of their situation, they had day jobs, and they worked it out. So they have a day job, and then when they get shows, they would work out how they would do that. But for us, we didn't have day jobs. We were just working at the alley, and whenever we, were out of work, and have to go look for something and stuff. And most people would start interested in hiring somebody for 4 weeks or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So it became a little more difficult. But because of all of that, I just started teaching at the University of Houston downtown, as an adjunct professor, and then the company kind of evolved from that position there.
Oh, okay.
So I talked to the director of the theater. They weren't doing anything with the space in the summer. I said, you ever thought about doing some plays and stuff, and he's like, well, you know, if you want to do something, cool, but I don't want anything to do with it. So I thought, well, we can do some kind of a summer stocky thing, which is what I had when I was in college at Eastern Mexico University, which was just for give people a chance to do something else in the summer instead of like going home or doing something. Um, we could start a professional company, and this is the fourth largest city in the country. And I'm like, it'd be probably better for the students to work with professional actors in trying to build a professional situation. So the company kind of came out of that. And we were primarily just a summer company at that time for about 2 or 3 years. And then eventually, uh, you know, well, through a series of things, we ended up leaving the school, because the board was like, you can get your own space. Let's go and get our own space. So I was like, well, okay, if you guys want to do that, let's go. And so from there, then we started expanding the company out to be like a full year round kind of theater company. And so I discovered in through that process that I really, really like being engaged. The thing about running a
Mm.
theater company and being a director or an artistic director is that it never stops. You always have something else that you have to do all the time. And it got to a point where I got a little scared, because I was like, I kind of like this a lot more than I'm liking acting. I was like, I mean, what? So I was a little freaked out about that initially, because it was so engaging. But
Mhm.
over time, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, the production. I mean, even though the company took off in one sense, it was kind of one of the theaters that people in town knew about and were trying to be a part of. And even though our New American Voices Playwriting Festival was getting pretty well known, I mean, I had friends of mine who would go travel a lot to places like New York and Chicago, and would always sort of ask, say, "Have you heard of the landing?" And they came back and said they have, and they really think you guys are
Wow.
are doing great stuff. But it was kind of amazing because we had that kind of notoriety outside of Houston, but we just couldn't pick up enough traction inside Houston. And so we were always struggling financially. We never could pick up any big donors, that kind of thing. And we lasted, for 11 years, and we did a lot of good stuff, helped a lot of playwrights, and created a lot of opportunities for people. And so when the time came for that to shut down, it was like, well, we did what we set out to do, and now it's time. I don't feel bad about it shutting down. I feel like we accomplished a whole lot. And so
Mm.
that's kind of how that kind of all went. And like I said, that the whole thing with the things, how they changed at the alley, in terms of
Yeah.
our financial situation and the obligations there, just made sense for me to just let that go and move on. And then with the studio, the one thing I learned in the aftermath of the landing, and I've said to some people many times that I've discovered that there are good ideas and there are smart ideas, and the landing was a good idea. And I
Mm.
started a theater company to really help people and do whatever, and we did that, and it was great. But it wasn't a smart idea because it didn't provide any, like any resources for me. I mean, we paid a lot of
Mm.
people, and I never got paid in 11 years. So 11 years of being a
Wow.
volunteer, I should say I got paid once, and it was through a grant, and I gave it all back to the company. So it's like not getting paid. Um, but 11 years of being a volunteer, and I got to the end there, and I was like looking at the bank account, and it's like we have as much money as we started with. And I said,
Mm.
do I want to spend the next 11 years if this is all it's going to be, And the answer was, well, no, I'd rather be fishing. So
Yeah.
I said to myself, in the second half of my life, I'm gonna I'm gonna pass on the good ideas because those come a dime a dozen. They come all the time, and wait for a smart idea.
Mm.
And so that's kind of where things are. It's like I was teaching and doing that and what have you. And the idea of sort of expanding it out and to making it have even more resources for the community and to provide opportunities for other great teachers to be able to share what they know and to provide real resources for the community. I said that's a business, and that's a smart idea. And so I, kept kind of just sort of expanding what I already was doing and doing well. And that's what we're doing now. We're kind of massaging it, expanding it more and more. Trying to reach more and more people and trying to make everyone aware that this is here for you. This is a resource for the whole community. And it's designed to be a place for sharing knowledge, sharing training, sharing um, resources with each other, and making sure that it's inclusive. That
Yeah.
everybody. There's not. I don't think of it as being competitive. Like I don't think that about anybody else that's teaching in Houston as being a competitor of me or of the studio. In fact, everybody that I know that's teaching, I put them in my newsletter and say, hey, if you're interested in teaching, here are all the other people that are doing it too, because it's
Mm.
ultimately about the people who are seeking the training. We just want you to make sure that you have as many resources as you can to help you out in any way that you need. And that's what this organization is trying to be for everybody. So we'll keep expanding, and as a result, we have people coming to us. I mean, Michelle Moore, she's probably the most prolific filmmaker here in Houston. She came, sought me out, like, hey, I want to teach for you. Another person, David Cohn, who's had done a tremendous amount of film and TV work, and he's like a very famous guy on this video game, and he's about to be inducted to the Hall of Fame for sort of videos. I don't know, video games or something.
Mm.
But he came to me and was like, "Hey, I'm interested in seeing your studio. I got some ideas about teaching." And so he's come to us. So people now are starting to come to us, big, high end people, because they see what it's trying to be and they want to be a part of that. They want to be included in that sharing of what they have um, and being that resource that the community needs and that we're trying to provide. So,
Yeah.
So I think it's a good business. I think it's a smart business, and so we're just trying to just keep growing. You know.
That's our approach even in the restaurant industry. My wife and I own restaurants, and we always say community over competition. You know, it's like
Yes.
the rising tide floats all boats kind of deal. You know, it's like it, if there's more variety, that's better for everybody. And and I love that. I think it's important. I think it at the end of the day, it's smart business. I think it
Yeah.
does it brings people to you. Um,
Sure.
as you kind of went into it, it feels like artists have to do a lot of different things in order to get by.
Right.
Like they've got to do more than one. They can't just be actors. They've got to either have a day job or when the work isn't there, they've got to go find another means to support them in between contracts. Or in your case, they've got to go out and start their own kind of side business in order to continue to do their art. And I guess I wonder, why do you think that is? And is that a negative indicator in our industry, or is it not?
Mm. Well, I think that it sort of the why of it is that there are simply not enough opportunities um, for people to make a living at what they do in this business. There are just far too many people that want to be in it,
Hmm.
and just not as many opportunities for that to happen. It's kind of a little frustrating because there was a little movement going on online, on Facebook, where there were some folks that were putting out the idea that if you can't afford to pay anybody, then you shouldn't be doing it. And I was like, that's really that's while that sounds noble, while that sounds like you're trying to protect artists in that way. On the other hand, you're kind of assuming that everybody who's not paying artists is doing it because they are not wanting to pay artists,
Hmm.
and so as a result, it means that companies like the Landing, which was doing a lot of good stuff and paid people when we could, not a lot, but we paid people. Um, uh, and there were some moments when we just were asking for volunteers, um, where I feel a lot of that work just wouldn't exist. A lot of those opportunities just wouldn't be out there for people, and so it would be less and less and less of that going on because there are so few places where people have enough resources to be able to do that. And so I feel like it would be a
Hmm.
little bit of a shame if suddenly all these readings, all these opportunities kind of just went away because the only people that were allowed to produce were the people who could afford to produce. Theater should be very accessible. It should be, the kind of thing that if you got a group of friends and you want to put some theater up, that you could do that. Um, so in terms of the sort of the business side of it, however, of just making a living, earning a living, I do think um, that the fact that there might be less work out there is an indicator of what's going on in the
Hmm.
business. Um, I mean, for instance, talking with some of the film people here in town, I know that, Texas is the legislature just put a ton of money into the tax incentives for film production for this year. And it's going to make a massive difference in the amount of film production that gets done and television work that gets done in Texas. And so that's coming. And Michelle Moore, I was talking with her, and she said, we've got to get ready, and we're not. We don't have enough of anything. We don't have enough studios. We don't have enough manpower, people that are skilled in those jobs, because we had that in the 70s and 80s. And when Louisiana and Oklahoma got into it with their tax incentives, and then eventually New Mexico, Texas just refused to respond. And so all that work went away. We had all these production people, we had crews, we had everything. And a lot of those folks just went to wherever the work was. They went, to Chicago, they went to New Mexico, Louisiana, Atlanta, um, and for a while Canada as well, because that's where the work was. It'll be interesting to see what happens when those productions start happening in Houston, Texas. Whether some of the people who were here and left because the work went, who really would rather be here,
Hmm.
would start coming back, and what have you. So I do think that in this sort of next decade, at least, probably the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a whole lot more paying work in Houston, Texas, and Texas in general, and maybe Houston, but in Texas in general, so that there will be more opportunities for actors to get paid work, and perhaps be able to get enough paid work where they don't have to be having those day jobs and all of those things. So I think it's all tied to just what the economics are. I don't know how that's going to impact the theater community, like whether the film business coming here is going to have any kind of a positive or negative impact on the theaters that exist now. I
Hmm.
really don't know. And I can't imagine that it's going to have that big of an effect, other than that some of the talent that the theater community depends on might get a little dicey.
Yeah.
Somebody, you're doing a play and you're in rehearsal and somebody's going to offer you, you know, $20,000 to go, shoot, whatever. It's hard to turn that down, especially if
Yeah.
you're getting $100 a week. Um,
Right.
so, so the theaters may see the impact of it in that way. Um, but I do think that with more film business coming into town, that is going, or coming into the state, it is going to have a significant impact on sort of the livability of being an artist in this town, or in this state, I guess. Um, so in that sense, it does affect things, in a significant way. But like I say, I mean, in terms of the theater itself and how many sort of paying jobs there are, I don't really know how to sort of impact that, other than the finding donors who are going to support theater more. There's tons of money here. I mean, Houston,
Mm.
there's tons of money for supporting the arts. But I do think that a lot of the people who have the big money are looking for the big opportunities. They want to put their names on big organizations. I mean, in
Mm.
5 years, the Houston arts community built, um, Queensbury's brand new theater that is rivals the Alley in many ways, in terms of the kinds of facilities it is. They had put up 80 players, which is very competitive with the Alley. I mean, it's a gigantic space. We built Match, which is a new facility for. It has 4 theaters in it, and it was built for the community
Wow.
to be able to kind of rent spaces. They got some office spaces they ran and some rehearsal spaces, but it's sort of this complex that is a rental place for theater and for dance, music, that kind of thing. So that was built. They took the Lux Theater up in Fifth Ward, which was a burnt out movie theater, which with an amazing history in the black community, and completely gutted it and completely renovated that and put that up out. So all these things happen in a very short period of time, 5 to 7 years. I mean, millions and millions. And then in addition, the alley had its second flood and had to raise, I don't know how much, probably $30 million or something like that to
Yeah.
finish renovating itself. All those things happened in that span of time. It
Mm.
was gigantic money. And yes, there was a lot of subsidies and a lot of corporations and all that stuff, but there was a lot of individual donors that put those money together, and they did not go bankrupt, and they still are giving. But still, the small theater companies that could use $100,000 and do a lot with, are still begging and still
Mm.
not getting the kind of response that you need. So if the theater community is going to really grow in terms of providing artists with more resources, I mean, especially when you're talking about pay, um, stuff that's going to help people make a living, um, it really, it really kind of comes down to getting the donors that are out there that really could support to say, you know what, I really want to help artists and not just the artists at the alley, not just
Mm,
the artists at 80 players, or tuts, I want to help artists. And by my money going to and being divided up or split up, or one year goes to one company, another year goes to some other company, to some of the smaller organizations, they can do a lot towards that in terms of just helping artists get paid. Um, and I'm hoping that some of that will happen. Like I say, I don't really know with the movie business doing what it's going to do. I don't think it'll have very much impact that on us, other than less artists, you know, um, being sort of available, I guess. But of course, more artists will come into town and all that. Um, but I also feel like the film business itself is something that could help, and that's unfortunately never been the case. I keep thinking that if the Hollywood people or just the people in the television business would even carve off like a 0.5% of what they make and just give it to the arts,
mm,
I mean, it'd make an enormous difference. I mean, it'd be talking about massive sums of money,
yeah.
and it takes so little, but they just kind of ignore us, and it's unfortunate that that's the case. And so I always hope, and by speaking it out loud and in a forum like this, maybe some people will hear it and go, you know what, that would be kind of all right. Let me do
You
that.
could almost look at that as a film industry investment in the next generation of artists, coming up to, because that's where most people cut their teeth and get started before they move out
Exactly.
to Los Angeles. I have two questions that are all related to this, which is, um, what is your vision for the future of the industry regarding the split between donorship and earned income as far as theater companies go? I mean, I feel like it's a common issue that I hear of like we just don't have the donors that we used to have. Like the donors are either not giving anymore, or the generation that gave to theaters is passing away, and the new generation that's replacing them just doesn't give in the same way. And so I was curious about that. And then also, um, I'll remind you of this if when you finish talking about that. But I wanted to know what the difference was for you as far as what the expectation was when you went to full time company member at the alley. Like, what was the difference in expectations and responsibility when you made that shift post pandemic or whenever that took place?
Mhm. Yeah. As far as the donor earned income aspect, I mean, I'm not a real big expert on all of that. I mean, I run a small company. It was very small, and we never had any real resources. So to
Mm.
sort of get into those sort of numbers and projections and what have you is not something that I typically do. But I do think that like I just had a board meet or a staff meeting today over at the alley, and they were talking about the numbers and what have you, and talking about the alley versus other theaters. And there are some theaters around the country that that operate basically with a very small percentage of earned income, operating with 30% earned income, um, and that gets theaters in trouble if you can't put out enough product where people are wanting to come see it. Then you get dependent on this other kinds of money, and when some of that stuff dries out, then you're kind of stuck. I know the alley um, is probably I don't even know, I can't even say the right number on that, but they're operating more in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% of earned income versus donor income. Um, but but I do think that theaters can't really survive very well or very easily unless they find donors. D- Um,
The
just in terms
smaller
of, 'cause
companies.
Yeah, the smaller companies, you just need donors. All the companies that I know of in Houston that are doing pretty well, all have um, some some connection to some decent sized donors, at least, and maybe not
Hmm.
major donors, but decent sized donors. You know, they're people whose families have some means, or they're very connected with corporate friends. They're like, hey, you help my son. You know, I've helped you. You help my son. That kind of a thing. Or they've
Right.
they've got connections either through their family resources or through um, other businesses that they've worked in. You know, I know one person who had worked for a law firm for a while and had some support that way. Um, if you don't have that, then it's a struggle. And when I look at all the companies that are out there, and you can kind of pick which ones have that because you can see that they're sort of well supported underneath, even if that money is not like a very public. They've got this sort of net underneath them, and the companies that don't have that, you can tell that they're struggling, and many times they'll last for 3 or 4 years, sometimes 5 or 6 years, and then they
Yeah.
go under because you just don't have the resources. And that was kind of the world that we were living in. Um, so it's important. I do think it's far more important that you have donors than that you have ticket sales. Um,
Mm.
it's just impossible to function without it. You know, I think you can't be a company that is primarily or entirely relying on earned income in order to be able to do what you do, unless you keep it very very small, very minimal, very just don't do very much. There are some companies that I know
Mm.
that they all they do are readings, and and so they don't have a high overhead, um, but at the same time they never have any money for anything. It's a volunteer organization, like you know.
They're certainly not doing any full-time acting company members at the places that are only operating with staged readings.
Yeah, exactly. Without that, then yeah, you're going to be doing basically a volunteer situation and just providing, doing small things, readings, those kind of things. Because it just takes money unless you own a space. It's there's expenses. You've got to pay for things, and if there's not much coming in, then you can't do very much with it. So
Right.
so yeah. And then as far as what was the question about the alley? You mentioned.
Well, so how was the shift when you went to full time?
Oh,
What was the biggest change in expectation?
well, the main thing was that we're on call the whole time.
Mm.
So there's a lot of other obligations. The theater would normally have to ask us, "Hey, would you want to, volunteer to go to this luncheon and with some donors and talk with them, and blah blah blah, or would you be willing to do X or Y?" And now that all shifts to where we now have our shows that we're working on, and that's primarily what we do. But now they're often sending us to do different things um, that we're now obligated to do. Like right now, they've worked out a deal where the resident company is teaching the opera singers over at the Houston Grand Opera.
Mm.
It's kind of a unique, neat program that they're just trying out just to see if it'll work. But again, that was one of those things that the alley worked it out and said, "Hey, here's our resident company," and so we just kind of had to go in and figure out what we're going to do with that. And there's different other kind of obligations we have. We can't sort of just leave town when we're on a break, that kind of thing. We've got to let
Right.
folks know. We got to get approvals and all that. We get like we have technically, 2 week vacation, just like everybody else has a 2 week vacation. So we have to kind of plan when those things are and when we're going to take those times. Well, it was mostly more about sort of the obligations that sort of surround the productions, and also for me, when it came down to me doing continuing with the landing or to not, it also had to do with preparation. Like if you're running a theater company, and this is the reality of running small theater companies. And I said to folks many times that if I'd have known how hard it was, I never would have done it. I
Mm.
would not have done it. But having started it, I was like, I'm going to complete this thing. I'm going to turn this into something. And that's kind of how I approached it. But the truth of the matter is that when you're a small theater a person that's running a small theater company or a founder of a company like that, everything that anybody else is not willing to do, you have to do. And so it didn't matter. You'd be working on a show, you're in tech, you're trying to get these lights hung and sets built, and you got volunteers that are helping you out and stuff. And it gets to 2 o'clock in the morning, and they come and say, "Dude, look, I'm sorry, I gotta go. I got
Yeah.
kids to get up in the morning, and I gotta work." And so there were many many times when I was stuck there all night by myself because it had to get done, and there was no one else to do it. And so
Yeah.
I was stuck doing that, even though I had to get up in the morning and go to work and do things and be whatever. Um, uh, and that's the reality of running a small company, is that you have a lot of volunteers, certainly, so it's not all on you. But when push comes to shove, it's you. You don't have the option
Mm,
of calling anybody else in. You've already used up all your reserves, and so
yeah.
if it has to be done, you got to do it. So knowing that and knowing what I'm trying to do with the alley, with the shows we're doing, all this stuff, and all these people that don't have this obligation, I'm like, I don't want to fall behind. I don't want to get to any place where anybody can say to me, you know what, David, you have your little theater company, and you enjoy that, so go ahead and do that, and we'll thank you for your time. I didn't want to leave
Right.
anybody feeling like they could do that to me. So I said, it's smart. You've never had any kind of guarantees. You never had any security like this. And the whole time you've been at the alley, it would be foolish for you to put yourself in a position where you could be um, sort of asked to leave just because you can't keep up with everybody else.
Uh, well, David, it has been a pleasure to reconnect with you, to see you. I learned a lot from you when I got to work with you, and I've admired you from afar in the meantime. And I think that all that you've done is just so impressive, and it was a great honor to have you on the podcast today. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's just great to see you again and what have you. So if you ever need anything else, let me know.
Yes, sir. Let's not let it be too long before we see one another again, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
All right.
best of luck with your restaurant. We got to talk more about that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. Well, this was the State of the Stage podcast. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and we will see you next week.